given all of the current game dynamics you've described, we've talked about the market as a psychological engine. We've talked about the geopolitical considerations that go into weakening dollar and all of these aspects. I want to ask you two things, but one first. How does gold fit into this picture? We already mentioned Russia has been a major buyer of gold. I think China has been the biggest producer and importer of gold for some period of time, or maybe if not the number one, close to it. So they're obviously playing that game. And then the second thing I'll ask you, which is after this, how does digital gold play into this game? So we'll start with gold. How does this fit into the picture you've laid out so far?
So the picture, where the rules change is really sort of when that is sort of the your paper is bad moment mathematically for everybody. Mm-hmm. As we near that moment, you will see various actors move to some other store of value. Mm-hmm. By virtue of the world that engages in global trade, economic activity, there's always going to be savers and debtors on net.
This is just, you're saying like the people, again, as the money becomes more misrepresentative of energy or goods and services, that people will start to prefer the money that represents energy.
Reserve assets that represent energy.
Okay. Yeah.
And gold to me just represents energy. It's just a store of value it's a neutral reserve asset. It's a 0% yielding bond of finite issuance and infinite duration with a flexible face value, which is superior basically in every way to a treasury bond, which is infinite supply, finite face value and finite duration. Yeah. So
centralized, decentralized.
It's all of that. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So that's where I think gold flows into it, which is just, there's a game theory of it, which is whoever panics first panics best.
So the incentive is to hit the exit door first.
Hit the exit door first, with the caveat of doing so is going to make you persona non grata amongst the rules-based global order, whatever that means these days. Which we've clearly seen, right? Like, we loved China while they were breaking American unions for us. And now they're breaking Washington and breaking politically connected parts of the U.S. economy, national champions, and we don't love China anymore. We're green until the Chinese make an unbelievable green car for 40 grand. And then we're not such a fan. So I think gold is just, it's stored energy. It's a sort of the original proof of work, and it is a neutral reserve asset that allows you to preserve and arguably grow energy. Preserve, at the very least, preserve energy purchasing power. Sure. Right? You can see that gold has been relatively steady. Yeah. Barrels, gold to oil ratio has been relatively steady for centuries. Yeah. In the same way that the dollar to oil ratio was steady from 73 to 03. Right. The Americans basically made the treasury bond as good as gold for oil. They made the dollar as good as gold for oil for 30 years, and then it broke. And once it broke, there was this intervening period, and then starting in 08, Putin's like, yeah, we're out of here. And then China was like, we're out of here. And increasingly, you're seeing more and more nations do that out of enlightened self-interest, which is that we can't, we will not survive as a nation. I will not survive as a leader if I let the representation of money and energy get too far away from each other. And so the way I protect that is I buy gold. And then the digital side of it.
Sorry. Before we go there, though, no, you said so many good things. The game theory component, right? So there is the incentive for an individual, business, or nation basically to defect first, right, out of the money printing ad infinitum game into the gold game, right? Because you're basically front running what you think other people. Well, if this thing's going to keep going, you're just going to keep printing this thing ad infinitum. Well, then everyone's going to end up here in the money that no one can print, which is gold. So the first one to do that will benefit from the later adoption of those, the anticipated later adoption of those.
Correct.
Right. So the first one to hit the door wins. But that, and so that is the incentive to defect from the game, right? So we're talking in terms of prisoner's dilemma game theory.
The rules are different for the different prisoners.
Right.
In other words, and this frustrated a lot of gold bugs for a long time, myself included, which is you are free as an individual to defect out of the game anytime you like, but don't expect gold to do what you want it to do or think you should do, because to tie us back to our original point about capping price and psychology, gold is a psychological Pavlovian bell, and they don't want it ringing. And the way they ring it is they create lots and lots and lots of unallocated paper gold claims, primarily centered in London. And so, if a bunch of people opt out of the game, there's two ways to respond to it. You let the price of gold go, which is a market.
Yes.
Hey, you're spending too much money, or I'm a policymaker, blah, 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 blah. Let's just kick it down the curb, kick the problem down the road. And you create, rather than letting price rise, you let unallocated paper claims on gold rise. And that went on for a very long time.
Yeah.
The rules are different for different players. What I mean by that is there are certain players that when they want their gold and their defect, they're going to get their gold.
Yeah.
That has two implications. I think the first implication is still very poorly understood across Wall Street and by most investors, even including some gold investors, which is in late 2012, early 2013, somebody showed up in London who could not be denied delivery and was told and told London, give me my gold now. And you can see it. You can see it in London and UK trade statistics. The UK was exporting so much gold from 2013 through the end of 2015 that the UK at various months actually turned into a surplus. They were a surplus country. That never happens. That's how much gold they were shipping. Where was it going? It was going east. It was going to China. So by preponderance of the evidence, the Chinese showed up late 12, early 13 and said, we're done here. Give us our gold. It matches up with the time horizon of when they said we're done buying treasury bonds, when they stopped buying treasury bonds later that year, and then early 14, respectively. But a weird thing happened because that paper gold market, again, this gets back to when you start, the lie gets bigger, bigger, bigger. When China showed up in London and said, give me my gold, as a party opting out of the system, not able to be denied or papered over, they broke the system. They broke the paper gold system, which is to say the price of gold crashed in 2013, not because nobody wanted gold, but because the wrong somebody who couldn't be denied delivery took the gold, wanted it, give it to me. If you built up an edifice, right? So we just said that they over years, decades, they built up an edifice of paper gold, unallocated paper gold claims, 100 ounces per physical ounce, let's say.
100 to 1,
maybe,
liabilities to assets.
Yeah,
right.
and there were estimates of more. There were estimates of less. But let's just use 100 because it's an easy
massive
number.
Fractional reserve.
Massively but that's how they capped gold's price.
Right.
I'll phrase it thus because it's easy to understand. If you have a 100 to 1 fractional ounce system based on 1 ounce, and China shows up and takes the ounce home, what's the value of all the other paper promises?
0.
Nothing. Gold crashed in 2013. Now, mechanically, why did gold crash? Because when you remove the collateral out of a highly leveraged system, what ends up happening, especially when the bullion banks manage it by being, they borrow short and lend long in that market. Now they're upside down. So the gold curve, the gold forward curve was inverted, which means they needed to get the front end of the gold curve down relative to the back end because they're borrowing short and lending long. So they're bleeding money. So what do? Bang, 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 bang. They bang down the front of the curve. And then China shows up and goes, great, you just lowered the price for me. I'll take more. And now it's, so mechanically, that's why it happened.
That's so counterintuitive too.
It is very counterintuitive. Yeah. The way to think about it for the casual observer is this holiday season, watch It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
And pay particular attention to the bank run scene. So when they have the bank run scene, everyone wants their money. There's the one stubborn lady or guy who settles at par, right? But everybody else, what do they take? They take a discount.
That's right. Yep.
So when Lehman didn't have enough collateral to settle its claims, Lehman's bonds didn't go up. they went down. The same dynamic here.
Right.
This was the collateral was being removed, and the impacts of that were hurting the price, the paper price that set the prices we saw on our screen.
Right. So it's like credit risk and the custodian manifesting more so than it is actual price discovery for real gold in a way.
I had, by virtue of what I was doing at the time, a relationship with an individual who would have rated a top 20 sovereign in terms of physical gold holdings. Allocated the whole 9 yards. Like, get on a jet, go check the vault every so often. Goldman Sachs came out in 2013, I want to say April, sell gold. Very aggressive call, very unusual. And gold proceeded to fall like 7 sigma. Like it was like unprecedented crash in the price of gold. Goldman ends up calling this relationship of mine, saying, hey, you saw our call on gold, we're negative on gold, blah, 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 blah. With that said, we stand ready to buy anything you want to offer us. Which only further supports the negative gold forward rates. Later that year, at the end of December 2013, Ken Hoffman, Bloomberg's commodities reporter at the time, gave an interview on Bloomberg TV in which he said the London gold vaults had been emptied, all packed up and recast in Switzerland and shipped on to China, never to return. His words, not mine. So, long-winded way of saying, I just think a lot of this stuff is super interesting background. When a player who cannot be denied shows up and opts out of the game changes. And that was, I think, a change in the game. Gold prices didn't fall in 13 because nobody wanted it. It was because too many people wanted it, right? The GLD's gold inventory went from like 1,300 tons to like 600 tons over the next 2 years. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? No one wants it. Why is it? It went somewhere. So that the who opts out of the game is very important.
Right.
And how they opt out of it. And I think to finish the point, there's the mechanical impact, but then once energy opts out of it and energy begins bidding for gold, that's when things get interesting. And that's where you start to see true price discovery. And that's where I was going to go with that, which is when Putin started shifting to gold, an ounce of gold bought 8 barrels of oil. That was 2008. Today, an ounce of gold buys 40 barrels of oil. And I think it's going way higher. I think it's going to 100, and then I think it'll probably go to 200 over time. I mean, this isn't like, hey, go buy gold because it's going to... And I don't think oil's going down a whole lot in price because U.S. shale doesn't really work too much below 65.
Right.
At least the marginal barrels. And it's got a big decline rate. So there are players, you can opt out anytime you like.
Right.
You can never leave the system unless you are big sovereign with nukes, with a factory base, with a lot of energy.
Right. Unless
you are Russia and China, and that's it. Because now it gives them a whole lot of flexibility. Think about it this way. If you're China, and China can buy oil in yuan from Russia, here's some yuan, Russia. Russia says, great, I've got this yuan. Now what do I do with it? Pre-Ukraine war, I'll buy Huawei equipment and all kinds of stuff. You're the factory of the world, China. You're making it for me anyway. Great. Here's it back. A virtuous cycle of trade. You end up with these imbalances either way. Let's settle it in gold. Okay, great. Oil is basically bidding for gold in this arrangement, right? Because generally the oil exporter ends up being the creditor on trade. As that happens, so that's going to bid up the price of gold relative to oil. Is China unhappy about that? Not really, because their people own a bunch of gold, and gold going up is relative to commodities is productivity enhancing, your living standards improving. Okay, that's good for us. And oh, by the way, we've got a bunch of gold, and so our oil's getting cheaper, and we need more oil to keep everybody happy. And is Russia unhappy about that? Not really. They bought a ton of gold at 8 barrels an ounce, 9, 10, 13, 14, 20 barrels an ounce, and now it's 40.
All right.
So they're replacing their oil reserves in the ground that the Americans are trying to debase by printing money with gold that is going up relative to their. It's a great trade. And if there was ever a war, which it turns out there was, and something happens to Russian oil sanctions, they go to China and be like, hey, we need to replace some of our reserves. Instead of 40 barrels an ounce, how about 60? Chinese will be like, friggin' great. We get more oil for the same gold. And the Russians will be like, the gold we have here just replaced the reserves you stole by freezing them. You revaluing it using our oil. They're sovereign. They're sovereign. They're decentralized.
Right. That's the key word, right? Because as you're describing the amount of oil they can purchase per unit of gold, right? Their purchasing power is going up, and that's the game. It is a power game ultimately, right? Money is power, right? And so the money that holds or accrues the most purchasing power over time is going to be the one that is most favored. But you're right. There's a qualitative distinction between which player can do what. I mean, I guess you even as an individual, you can technically take possession of physical gold and opt out of the game.
You can, but then you just simply have no choice as to you're still in the game in that paper because they decide when the paper market, right? Basically Putin, Russia, somebody with oil, nukes, and factories has to decide when the game's going to break.
Got it.
Versus
the paper gold game.
The paper gold game.
But they are also breaking the paper gold game, if I understand you correctly.
Who's that? The Russians and the Chinese?
Yeah, Russia.
Oh, they did break it. Yes, they are absolutely. I think they basically are in control of the gold market.
Okay,
now.
So then eventually I would assume whatever catastrophe needs to take place, at some point the paper gold market would actually break, right? And no longer what's the old saying that when the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked, right? When things really get bad, World War III or whatever the calamity is, people will all, like countries will demand physical gold only, settlement in physical gold only, right? Promises to gold wouldn't even be acceptable.
Yes, the game will, you'll see when who's swimming naked, when there's that demand where only physical will do. Now, what I think is interesting is, I think the paper market basically broke in 2013 when China did that.
Right.
We then proceeded to see a series of events that one possible interpretation, it's my interpretation, but I think it's a reasonable individual would come to a similar conclusion, that Western sovereign and multinational regulatory authorities have been basically encouraging the too big to fail banks to get on sides. In other words, wind down that paper gold market because that moment is coming. And so, for example, JP Morgan, long thought to be basically sort of, it's the United States, right? It's
who said something like, gold is money, everything else is credit. Right.
Originally, the JP Morgan said that. And JP Morgan Bank today, September 2019, their precious metals trading desk gets charged under RICO, racketeering charges, by the U.S. government, criminally, not civilly, for actions in the precious metals market. Why would the federal government of the United States go after its biggest bank's trading desk for manipulating gold, when all conventional wisdom is that the more gold is stepped on, the better for the American government? That was sort of signal number one to me. The next signal was the net stable funding ratio changes advocated for by the Bank of International Settlements, BIS.
Net stable funding ratio?
So it's bank mumbo jumbo. What it meant was, what it effectively said was, banks need to they not only need to, they mandated rules that made it uneconomic for the banks to continue to hold large unallocated gold positions because they had to finance them differently. And so basically they were upside down. They needed to wind that business down by 2022 or 2023.
Does this mean they had to liquidate the gold or lend it out or what?
No, it just meant they remember they've had the gold here and you've got the big thing of paper.
They need to wind down the paper.
They had to wind down. They had to get on sides. They didn't want them. And it was interesting because they said gold represents a systemic risk for the banking system that we're trying to mitigate. And what I said at the time was the only way gold represents a systemic risk for the banking system is if the price of gold goes up a lot quickly, to your point. Yeah. And so here we have them, again, get on sides. Then we have the curious case of JP Morgan and the GLD. GLD is the world's biggest gold ETF. I look at it as the world's biggest freestanding pile of gold. It's non-sovereign, 800 some tons, I think. It was founded in 2004, launched in 2004. 18 years, one custodian, HSBC Bank. Headquartered or the vault in London. December 2022, JP Morgan decides it's going to be the second. It becomes the second GLD custodian. JP Morgan then says we're going to move some of the gold out of London to Zurich and into New York. JP Morgan then proceeds to take over half the gold into its vaults by mid-2023, and it's according to some sources, 80 to 90% of the gold in GLD is now in JP Morgan vaults. In under 2 years.
So from London to Zurich.
Some from London.
Mostly to New York.
Yeah, some from London to there's it's still mostly in New York, London, I believe. But it had never been anywhere but London. Right. And then all of a sudden JP Morgan was talking about taking some out into Zurich, into New York. But now 80 to 90% of the gold in GLD is custodied by JP Morgan, not HSBC. After 18 years the most innocuous explanation to me is, in light of the other stuff, is JP Morgan knows the price of gold is probably going to go higher over time, and they can pick up fees at a big discount. And so far, it's looking great, right? Gold's gone from, I don't know, 2,000 to 2,700 in 2 years. So you're up, if you were making 30 bips on 2,000, now you're making 30 bips on 2,700. That's not nothing. So there's just this series of events that suggests to me that moment is coming or could come. And who knows what that moment is.
If you enjoyed this clip, click here for the full episode and here for more just like it. Also, like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money and subscribe to stay connected. Thank you.